morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Vice Chairman of the State Planning Commission, Professor, my friend Dr. Jayaranjan, the members of the State Planning Commission, my colleague in the IT Department, Additional Chief Secretary Thiru Kumar Jayant, the many senior government officers I see seated here today, other members from the IT Department, from the Finance Department, from other parts of the government. I hope there's a lot of representatives from industry, academia, though I can't recognize you by face from here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to the Planning Commission, to the Vice Chairman for setting up this one-day event, and I hope it'll have a lot of fruitful discussions. I must first apologize. I was told to be here at 10:20. I came at 10:21. I thought I was 1 minute late. Then I was told I should have been here for the inaugural at 10, so I'm 21 minutes late. Now the program is running about 40 minutes late. So, we have all contributed to this snowballing effect. I must also say at the outset that after listening to my good friend and colleague ACS Thiru Kumar Jayant's speech, I was reminded that, we are probably the opposites of each other in many ways. I am a newcomer to politics, newcomer to governance, and by nature a change agent, always trying to harness or tap or drive change. And Thiru Kumar Jayant, the long-standing officer of the government, once known as the steel frame, the IAS cadre, formerly the ICS cadre. It's probably the quintessential government officer of deep service, senior rank in the IAS Officers Association, seen a lot of things come and go. And so if I am the winds of change, he is the platform of stability. And he rightly asked very profound questions about what the limits of such technologies are. I think also we are relatively optimist and relatively pessimist in different ways, in the sense that I'm always optimist that that change will improve and yield results, and pessimist that the status quo is very highly validated by inertia, and so change is difficult, but it needs to change. And I think having seen decades of people like me come and go, Thiru Kumar Jayant probably feels that the stability that the system provides is of greater value than winds of change like me who blow in and blow out in election cycles. But even in that context, I must say that it is of great joy to me that this initiative that we started when I was Minister for Finance, Pensions, Personnel, Administrative Reforms, Planning, Development, the Center for Information and Governance is flourishing and has been led so ably by the Planning Commission and is resulting in initiatives like this workshop. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Most governments, this is not reflective of any one government or one party or one state or even one country, most governments around the world are woefully behind the level of execution and the kinds of functional capacities that are required for the scale and complexity of the world we live in today. All over the world we see a lot of resentment, a lot of frustration, because governments are inherently monopolies. Unlike in a competitive capital market, governments are monopolies, and so the urge for change or the urge for competitiveness is non-existent. So I often say the difference between my corporate career and my government service. In my corporate career, I lived in an environment where competence was the basis for success in execution, in business models, in delivery, in results, in profit and loss. In government, politics is the basis for success for politicians to decide who runs the government. After that, the government's a monopoly and there's really no competition. In that sense, I think this lack of capacity around the world is leading to the need for words like GovTech. Because really, technology is the only way we can bring the kinds of transparency, the kinds of functionality, the kinds of delivery that citizens now demand that governments have not historically been able to deliver, at least in the last couple of decades. I take, for example, the points made by Dr. Ellen about both of his issues about not knowing where the file is or the floating bureaucracy and not having kind of transparency. This doesn't require blockchain. It just requires good e-office. It requires good, transparency. It requires a commitment to citizen connect and citizen accountability. The irony of this is Dr. Ellen, as an MLA, was not able to know where his file was processing. I'll say the opposite. When I was finance minister and hundreds of files used to cross my desk every day, I often used to get calls saying, "Can you help me? This file is at your desk. Please sign it," from people completely outside the government. And I used to wonder how efficient the information flow is, where government processes were so transparent to interested parties. They would know where their file was, on whose desk, on what day. I wouldn't know, but they would know. So, these are things that sometimes have vested interests that keep it this way. I think we're moving towards e-office at relatively decent speed now, and hopefully in another year or two, we'll be 100% e-office. Some parts of India, the union government already are. So I think many of these bottlenecks can be removed through this basic continuity of data, transparency, institutional memory, and things that technology has been around for 20, 30 years. But if you look at blockchain, to me, my exposure to blockchain came from the financial services industry where I worked. And the two most common problems that blockchain solved: a large volume of financial risk in the form of derivatives, in the form of structured products, in the form of actually fixed income securities like bonds, is traded what we call over the counter. That is, one dealer to another dealer. Pick up the phone and say, buy, sell. Places like New York, my verbal contract, all the phones are recorded. My verbal contract to say I buy or I sell is a legally binding contract. So here you have hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars changing hands every day. There is no central repository. There is no record of this transaction except between the two of us. Eventually, there is some reconciliation because the coupon or the interest payment or some, cash payment has to be made. So what happens is, whoever originated the bond in syndicate, whoever issued the bond as the first primary issuer, will be by default the ledger keeper, and all transactions will have to be eventually recorded back to them before record date for the payment of the coupon or the dividend or some other financial asset, transaction. So in that system, there was good and there was bad. There was good in the sense there used to be a single repository. There was bad. No issuer really wanted to be the ledger keeper. There was some marginal value of having the information. But because of the law, you had to keep that information away from the traders. So we didn't have in line of sight to who owned what and where it was. And it was an onerous responsibility to keep updating these things. So in the case of cash bonds, at least, it was relatively straightforward. In the case of derivatives, where there is no underlying cash, then the risks are humongous and they're immense. This is precisely one of the driving factors of the global financial crisis. The fact that there was no central repository, nobody knew what risk was traded to whom, nobody knew how it was being held, by whom, in what country, in what continent, in what form. So effectively, one of the biggest reforms that came after the crisis was this notion that all derivative contracts have to be traded in a clearinghouse. You have to actually have some central repository where even over-the-counter transactions have to then be re-registered, and counterparty risk has to be marked to market every day, and the gap has to be covered and all this. Very technical. The point is, ledgering is the basis for, at some level, global awareness of what is happening, what is the scale, what is the scope, what is the risk, who holds it. And so that's really where I think the first uses of blockchain came in over-the-counter financial transactions and in transactions like syndicated loans or bond issuance, where once the primary was done, there was no natural reason for me to want to keep being the bookkeeper. I have seen, of course, a lot of other uses, but I would say broadly the motivation for things like blockchain is three. One, confidentiality. I don't want anybody else to know what I have. We see that in Bitcoin and things like that. For you to figure out what I have, thousands and thousands of pieces of data across tens or hundreds of servers will have to be put together in a unique way for you to know what I own or what I don't own. So, blockchain, on the one hand, promises the integrity of a universal ledger and at the same time promises confidentiality. The second is fear of control. As I say, if I'm the ledger keeper, I know everything about who's selling, who's buying, what day you sold, therefore, why must you have sold, what does the rest of your portfolio look like, what is, so the amount of information I have by being the central keeper of the ledger, and I'm just talking about the market now, I've not yet come to the government, is so high that a lot of people would prefer that there is no central ledger keeper and it's a distributed ledger which has enough integrity to not be easily corrupted or stolen. The third, which is the counterpoint to what the respected Chief Secretary said, Additional Chief Secretary said, yes, at some level the government is only source of information. But the problem with the government being the only source of information is, one officer at one time, if he feels like it, can go and manipulate one record and perpetually the record is corrupted. There is no cross-reference. It's not like everybody has access to the records. In theory, the government has multiple places where we store land records. Is a legacy of some bad British, priorities. But the net result is, if there is only one source of information, then not only is it about information control or information access and value, but it's also about the potential for malfeasance at one single point. And so I think, though the promise of blockchain is maybe yet to be realized, the need for it is very clear. It is simply these three things. I want confidentiality without sacrificing integrity. I want a distributed ledger so that nobody has unique control and access to information and be able to leverage it. And I don't want the risk of malfeasance at a single point in time. That's the basis, at least as I understand it. Now that transfers to a lot of different things. And I was going to talk about some use cases that I have seen, just as an example. I was just talking to my secretary that when I went to New South Wales for the first time as a minister, I'd been there before, but when I went in 22 or something, they showed me two use cases. They had already created digital wallets and tokenized certificates, from educational certificates to driving licenses and all that. So whenever somebody got stopped by a policeman or you had to show it at your insurance company, you could just show it on your phone. But what they then did was that for COVID, part of the relief measures was to distribute cash, as in most societies. They distributed cash to citizens to help them deal with lockdowns and the consequences. In the case of New South Wales, they did it in a very interesting way. They gave it as cash to be used at restaurants, at commercial establishments. So it was not open cash, like you couldn't go and put it in your bank account. It was basically cash that was only fungible were you to spend it and support some other business. Now that they did through these digital wallets with this blockchain technology, because once the cash value was loaded onto your phone, you would go, and because all of you were on the same kind of network, the restaurant could validate your cash and could basically transfer it to their account, phone to phone, phone to point of sale machine. So I thought these two were tremendously helpful and value-adding applications. I've also seen through my friend who used to be the head of MAS, blockchain and fintech, who's now, they've started a company, a government-owned company called Elevendi, and they are now supporting around the world the application of blockchain-based MSME and consumer kind of cross validation of credit rating. That is, from petty shops to consumers, if all of them are on the same system, they can validate each other's speed of payment or honoring of their debt or settlement period between one supplier and one vendor. And what it does is it builds a credit rating system within the average consumer and the petty shops and the kind of small businesses, with no government interference and no fear that the government is tracking who's doing what behavior, and no universal power like a credit rating agency that knows anything and everything about you. Basically, it's a shared resource between all these people that helps them validate each other. They have been so successful at it, now they've spun it off as a company and they're offering it in other parts, not even so much for profit, but basically as an independent enterprise in parts of Africa, places where there's already a lot of mobile money, like Kenya, where they use, like 60% of the payments go through M-Pesa and things like that. So there are many, many use cases. Even in Tamil Nadu, I would say we have announced the ePettagam, the Nambike Inayam blockchain platform. It's still nascent, it's still early stages. We are talking about lakhs of documents that have been registered there when the potential is for crores. But I can see how citizens would prefer to not have to come back to the government every time they need a new validated copy. So, for example, if your degree certificate or your school certificate is a physical piece of paper, very often the person processing it says, no, go back and get some other validation or certification from the government that this is original and all. So there are a lot of fake certificates. So there could be instances where for basic documents, driver's license, school and college certificates, all the way up to land records for processing loans against your ownership. Of course, the degree of control of how much of this would be within the government data systems and how much of it would be distributed across the public is different. But certainly between the public and the government, there should be some form of tokenized validation and usable certificates and usable evidence without having to go back every single time to an officer and then have to deal with the friction costs that come from that. So anyway, this is not the point. I think these were not the points the Planning Commission had asked me to talk about, but I will say broadly that Tamil Nadu as a pioneer in the field of information technology, as certainly the number one source of human capital in this sector, has taken the lead in many things. We are at a very interesting inflection point in this area. As I say often, I've seen many in my lifetime. The PC revolution, the AD converter, the thin client, the ERP systems and the automation of processes, the first web, the second set of web things, now IoT, deep tech, AI, so many things. But I think it is at this level for me as a minister, quite far removed from the day-to-day operations. I would say it is heartening for me to see such initiatives broadly undertaken by the government and the Planning Commission. And in particular, as somebody who believes that the platform of governance needs to be profoundly improved, needs to be, many stages improved, then I'm happy that such a center for innovation in governance is functioning well, that GovTech is one of its focus areas, that blockchain today, but I'm sure many other approaches to GovTech will be taken up. I hope you'll all have a very productive and enlightening day. I apologize again for the delay. I have to run because I have 11:30 meeting somewhere else. But I hope to be back in the afternoon for the panel discussion and be enlightened by those who have participated between now and then about the discussions that have happened. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.